please feel free to go. I think I heard you'd like to say a little bit more. Please feel free, because I think there's a lot that we'd all like to absorb, and I think we're all very interested in what you have to say. Before I introduce the three, who I think everyone knows anyway, I would also just like to say thank you to the organizers for really the wonderful 2.5 days. And it's really exciting to have this moment now to hear how everything comes together, especially after watching this harvest film and see these final steps now taking shape. So thank you very much for all that. So let me introduce our guests. I think they're not unknown to anybody in the room, but let me make it a bit more formal. Our first person who will speak will be Inge. She is the current rector of the ISS, the Institute for Social Studies in The Hague, but part of Erasmus University. She is professor of participatory qualitative research in population and development at the ISS, and prior to that was a professor of demography, vice dean of research, and dean at the Faculty of Spatial Sciences in Groningen. She has extensive research experience in the Global South. And for her, what we were talking about before is one of the most important aspects of doing research is that it's action research and is based on principles of reciprocity. And I think you'll probably say a little more about that during her speech. I'll go ahead and do all the introductions right off the bat, and then we can then move more smoothly from one speaker to the next. Next on the couch is Ajay Bailey. From Utrecht. Ajay is a professor of social urban transitions, part of the IDS group, the International Development Studies group in Utrecht. He heads the Department of Human Geography and Spatial Planning, and he also leads the research line there in global migration, culture, and place. And for himself, he works at the interface of anthropology, geography, demography, and public health, so bringing together these different complex approaches. And currently working on research projects focusing on access and inequalities in the urban sphere. So thank you very much for being here. And finally, let me introduce Erica Nelson. She's joining us from the UK. She's a research fellow at the Institute for Development Studies in Brighton. And there's a joke behind that, but I won't tell it right now. I'll tell it later. So she's a research fellow within the IDS group on health and nutrition, and also an affiliate member of the Participation, Inclusion, and Social Change Cluster, also at the Institute of Development Studies. She's an historian and anthropologist, and she focuses on issues of community-based public health, health systems development, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and the politics of knowledge in health research. And wanted me to add that she's very happy to be here. And we're very happy that she's here as well. So I'd like to get started then. I invite you to begin with your reflections.
I know, should we move out of the way for this?
Oh yeah, indeed.
Just not to block the screen.
I hope you can hear me. Also, yeah, fine, great, thanks. First of all, thank you so much. Maggie, where are you? And because I'm so happy to get the invitation from you and Joita, and happy also that I've been here in the past days and just being able to participate. So what I did, I have some self-reflections on the seminar, the forum. I kept in mind I was working on this yesterday evening, and I just took first what were the objectives of this meeting as framed in the outline. So exactly to go to new pathways on just international development, and talking about theories and approaches, methodologies, for example. I just came in only during the World Café, before the World Café. So I'm happy I did, because I got immediately to grip the idea of what we're going to do. With quite a statement that you are just, if development projects are attuned to contextual specificities, including asymmetrical power relations, well, how we have been dealing that, and the question even could be the question, the notion of development, whether that's still relevant or not. So I started from there. I always feel like I want to know what was the objective and what did I do about it. What inspired me was yesterday's meeting on migration and mobility. There were wonderful presentations of papers, and Maggie was sitting there, and after time the question was afterwards, and what about justice? What is just in this? And it was nice to see that all presenters could easily answer that and tell about it. So for me it sounded like it's almost like maybe it's sometimes implicit what we do and we don't make it explicit enough. So that really inspired me working on this. So I decided to do some preliminary self-reflections on ISS, being director of the Institute, and actually ISS being the Institute with one of the key values being social justice. So our key values are social justice, equity, and in the past years we included inclusion. So I just give a reflection, just a bit hop-snap from different ways, but just to give you an idea about how I reflect on it, what I learned. And it's very nice to exchange ideas or hear comments and so on, of course. So just to tell a bit about ISS, we exist 70 years, so we celebrated our 70th anniversary in October last year with a theme of reconnecting to each other after the Corona period, also reconnecting to ourselves and reconnect to the past and to the future. So really also looking at where do we come from, what is our origin, and where are we moving there now? So ISS was established after decolonization of Indonesia, and very clearly related to that, ISS was established a couple of years later, actually for capacity building for mid-career professionals, for civil servants who were working in the ministries, first instance in Indonesia, later also other countries. But that was how we started. And we actually started also being in the palace, not einde. So there's, well, it gives an impression also about where we come from, established by the different universities in the Netherlands with the mandate to take care of capacity building of students from the global south. The implicit message was then, of course, at that moment, well, you don't know yet how to do that, to come to the government issues. We know how you have to develop and we will help you. I think that is how we started, just black and white, making a bit of white. I'm quite sure that at that moment, people thought that was just. That was a just thing to do. So that made me also think, being just.
I'm sorry, Inge, I have to disturb you.
Yeah?
Because we want to capture your voice, even though you have a very good voice, but not for the
Okay.
camera. And I'm so technology handicapped person. That I need this. I need this.
And
Sorry
I
about
can
this,
start
Inge.
from here. I can continue from here.
Yes.
Okay, I don't have to
Sorry. It's okay.
fine. That's easy.
And now we can hear you so well.
Yeah, that's better. Okay, so at that moment, I'm quite sure that people who established ISS thought they were doing the just thing, and also people from developing countries thought it was the just things. So it's also a reflection about that justice and other concepts as well is also really part of the time. So maybe who knows after 20 years how people will look backwards to this period, what we are doing now. So I think that's important to realize, and now of course we see it as very paternalistic, very much like we know it for you, and we are here and you are there. 2 times ISS developed, and I don't go into detail here, we went through that as a community. But all the concepts, also like capacity building, we're not using that anymore, because it also has a connotation. Local needs, actually also we do not really use that anymore. It's more about co-creation and collaboration. And same about, do we talk about developing countries, about the global south, or about the majority world, people in the majority world, which is used much more often recently. Everything has a connotation. And in the World Cafe, I was saying at the end, then we concluded really like, well, language matters a lot. So the word of the last assignment, but how do you upscale? I think all the tables of No, there's no upscaling. Why should there be upscaling? And the word itself is contested, contaminated, I would say. So that's a bit going through the history, realizing that it's a time dimension to it. We talked about theories and approaches at this moment, and developments in that. Just to think a bit at this moment at ISS, we have a lot of theories and approaches. The institute is we have about 50 academic staff members, many more PhD researchers, with different theories and different approaches. So there's still development economics very strongly, also evaluation theories, poverty reduction, but also contesting development, decolonizing, degrowth. And the degrowth is quite interesting. We had a couple of visitors from the Global South, and one of the specialists in degrowth, he talked about degrowth, and then the participants from the Global South said, well, thank you very much. I think you have to do the degrowth, the Global North. For us, please let us do some growth, because we still need to do that. So also to realize also that concept is of course contested and seen from different perspectives. The different methodologies, also the common ones, but also experiments, feminist methodologies, transformative methodologies, just to indicate that I think it's also just the diversity of approaches, the diversity in methodologies is for me also just because you need that diversity. You do not need a whole group being at the same line, but there are some commonalities. So in 2018 we defined a new strategic plan, energized, embedded and engaged. And I have 4 topics mentioned here, and I want to look into that with justice in mind. So the aims were to become a more research-intensive university institute, including the teaching, with very high societal relevance, focus on engagement, and creating a safer place to work and study. So for research with high societal relevance, we defined a framework on how do you do research with high societal relevance, and how do you do research with the objective and of academic, creating, building academic knowledge, and contributing to social change. To the right side, you see everything for social change, and the other one's academic knowledge. And what we reason is that you actually start from your values. So our values are social justice and equity and inclusion, and how do they motivate all our activities. So when you start a research project, immediately at that moment already, one is to define what is the objective. Is it academic knowledge, or is it social change, or is it both, and what does it mean? So that's the first circle, is the why, the values, but then immediately also designing your research project, with whom are you going to do that? Because we strongly believe if you go from societal change to societal relevance, that you have to start from the beginning, so designing the project together. Because otherwise you just define it from an academic perspective and not together with your other societal stakeholders. We actually did write ourselves also in a book about our qualitative research methods that Ajay and Inge and me did write. So with whom is a very important step. So with whom are you doing that, designing it? The next one are, how are you going to do that? That's more the methodologies also. What kind of methodologies are you going to apply? Participatory methods, or is it more common methods, or feminist methodologies? But it's also about theories, for example, what are you going to apply? So how is the how question. Then what is also the outcome of it, the output. And the right side is everything that is on social change. So it's more policy documents, can be actions, can be interventions. And the left side is the academic outcome. And at the end there's again one, with whom are you going to do that? With your peers or with other societal stakeholders? So you reason throughout the different cycles. Now in general, I think everyone in ISS will agree with that, but there will be differences. So this is just something in wording, I won't go through it. complete because I explained it, but the how can be, some of us call themselves scholar activists, and others call themselves activist scholar, and there's a huge difference between the two. I call myself participatory action researchers, others say I'm a researcher for social change, others feel that they're more towards the academic knowledge. Again, for our institute, we need all these kind of different types of researchers. So it's not mandatory to really do everything in the same way. So, and what is the academic social change? Policy actions, influencing the discourse. I think at this moment we're doing a lot on influencing the development discourse. Policy recommendations, but relatively less on actions and interventions. We do that more. And the last thing, for whom and with whom are you doing it? There is for me still a question. Policymakers, communities, but do we take our participants in the research enough into account? Because there's an interesting report from the Canadian International Development Centre 2017, and we have the SEP protocol, the Standard Evaluation Protocol, for evaluation of research, and then we ask about research relevance, of course, and they give nice indicates, well, is it a real world issue that you're working with? Is the problem identified by participants as well? Is it relevant for them? And they also come to concepts of research legitimacy. Is the project engaged with local knowledge? What is the level of trust between participants and the researchers? These are very different dimensions, I feel. And another one is research importance. Does the research really meet the needs of the local community and participants? What do you do with your research findings, and who is responsible for that? So different evaluation criteria. I'm sure in a Dutch system we don't have them yet, but we are working on, I'll tell it here, the open and responsible science. I think all our universities are working on that, and some really focusing more, other faculties in Erasmus, for example, focus a lot on open access and the quite known aspects of open and responsible science, and we want to really focus more on responsible science. So it's about ethics and integrity, of course. It's also about citizen science, it's about engaged research, it's about epistemic justice. And there is a real good chance, I feel, for development studies to really include our expertise and what we're doing, our approaches in this responsible science. So we have been discussing also about how do you position yourself in the rest of the faculty or the rest of the university. If you take this serious, then you really have a big advantage and a big expertise already on this and experience. So now we also have a group working on transformative methodologies. We discussed that also in the World Cafe about emancipatory methodologies. The group is working on transformative methodologies, but can the research process, it's not for other societal stakeholders, but can the research process itself also be transformative? And what does that mean? Are you with your research reproducing inequalities or keeping hierarchies there, or are you trying to change, or what is happening? So to really have self-reflections on that. And then the key question also the group is focusing on who wants transformative methodologies, or what we discussed on the table, emancipatory methodologies, yes, but for whom emancipatory? Who brings about an intersectional consequence? But the linkages are there, so it will be good to have a look. So I think for this framework, we're really working on this social justice to really go through the whole research process and look at these different evaluation criteria and feeding back to ourselves, reflecting where are we. And then it's not only about justice, it's also about integrity, it's also about inclusion. So I think that's really a mix of concepts that is relevant. Now what we will do, we will adopt this with open and responsible science as well. So Salva Picasa is the person who is very much working on decolonizing knowledge perspectives. She became the first woman of color professor last year. Actually a big shame for ISS that it's only 2022. We have men professors of color and originating from the global south, but not yet a woman. So that's really something to really work out, and also really working on this equality in partnerships. And it's easy to say, yes, we do it in an equal way, but are we really doing that? Because the power dimensions are always there. You bring funding, most often I think, what does that mean? And is it really, really an equal partnership? It'll be very interesting to work on that. And then the open responsible science. Now, so that was a bit about the research. And just this, in teaching, it's a bit less clear, for me at least. We have an MA in development studies, every year 150 master students, and 98% of the students are from the Global South. So that's different from Amsterdam, different from Utrecht. I inquired yesterday during breakfast with you what the students, so that's very different. They have teaching, they have courses and fieldwork for a research paper, and it's about 16 months is the whole program. So if you talk about, just this, we have a global classroom, learning concepts, learning theories and methodologies, but what our students are always saying that they learn from us, from all the professors, but they learn mostly from each other, because they are from more than 50 nationalities. So we provide the concepts, the theories, but then there's always the global classroom. Well, how is it in Mexico? How is it in Uganda? How is it? So adding the local context, and that you have that 50 times with different perspectives. And they always leave that we learn most from ourselves and from the whole group. So there's a lot of exchange in learning the differences and similarities. When I reflected yesterday evening a bit about what justice and for whom the justice, we are really in the process of rethinking our MA program. Are we still up to date in development studies? Are we up to date to the needs that the students have? Is development still the right concept? It looks like we have difficulties in letting it go, but maybe we have to highlight a bit more societal challenges, climate change, human rights, what we really do. But that's an issue we'll be looking at. It's very much the shifting powers from the global north to the global south. I'm sure you also observe that so many things are changing in the global south. Also shift towards equal partnerships. How do we do that from our side? How much aware are we of that? Very nice example I feel is the ABNIT training. It's a master program with students here in the Netherlands and a group of students in Nairobi. And they have every week, one day together, a class. Very interesting. It's also difficult to do it, but Nijmegen is very much convinced that it could not be that the students are all coming from the Global South to the Netherlands. So can you not do part also in the Global South? So that's also what we're taking along. How do you do that? How can you do that? Quite interesting, and I think it's just. That's the movement that we're making. And ultimately that's of course also what we want. That things develop in the countries themselves, and they already did a lot, of course. So yeah, be about more double degrees, or a model like AMID does, hybrid teaching innovation, very much work in progress at this very moment. So after 2 years, we can report a bit more. Then we see engagement as a separate topic, research, teaching, and engagement. So providing space for engagement, well, if I look these days, there's so much here as well. So we have visitors, for example, from the Zapatistas, activist groups from Honduras, sex workers organization from India, indigenous communities who are coming, and really collaborating with a couple of our researchers on sharing their stories and starting from there to see how can we work together and co-create together. I must say I always like it. We have a huge ethic in ISS, and then I'm working and do all my administrative stuff. In the meantime, I know that there's an organization with sex workers talking all kinds of important topics on sexuality, on sex work, on the ethic, and that gives a dimension of, yes, this is what we want to do. We also have, for example, governments coming. The Bangladeshi government had a very interesting meeting about the Rohingya in Bangladesh. And that was a kind of rehearsal for a meeting that they had in ICC, in the International Criminal Court, to to discuss. What we never much did before I came, and I proposed that we actually should also do something in our own environment in The Hague. The mayor of The Hague, when I came as rector 8 years ago, said, a beautiful institute, ISS, a pearl in The Hague, but the pearl needs a bit of shining a bit more. We were not that visible in The Hague. And I don't know how it's about your institute, but focusing so much on the global south. We are very well known in India, in Mexico, in Uganda, wherever, but less in The Hague. So we started that, and then Corona helped us in that way. So also having the same approach in the city of The Hague, looking at undocumented people, marginalized populations. That's actually what we almost all focus on, marginalized groups. The Habesha diaspora in The Hague, from Ethiopia and Eritrea, certain neighborhoods, and then researchers did the same type of research with voices from the communities, with co-creation, research and action in The Hague, like they do also in the Global South. So co-created storytelling, action research, research and publications, plus also co-created actions. I loved it a lot because I think it's a just thing to share our knowledge in our own environment. So I loved the presentations yesterday about Amsterdam, also about Friends of Boulder. Yeah, and also here I think development studies is really having a lot of expertise to do also here that kind of work. And then about creating a safer and more inclusive space, what I learned from my students that I should never say we create a safe place, because there can never be a safe place. It's always about a safer place, an R added. We have so many different nationalities, so many different cultures, so we are super, super diverse. So for us, diversity is less important than inclusivity. How are we inclusive? Can we be inclusive given all these different differences? And also, social justice is very nice. We all are very much doing work for social justice, but we have a lot of different social justice perspectives. So a key question is also how can we include them all and also be inclusive and nice to each other. So I don't know whether you recognize that, but that's also, yeah, you have to be a community. We talk about community. So just again, justice, yes, but for whom and in what way, and also to ourselves in our community, and not only outside or in our research work. This is just very preliminary. I loved working on it yesterday evening. It was nice to reflect, and thank you, Maggie, for every time asking yesterday a question, where is the justice? So I did not even look at the definition of whether it's what is justice or not, but I think it's justice, equity, co-creation, inclusiveness, integrity, and ethics. It would be nice just to find that out and reflect a bit more, and especially because we have social justice as one of our key values, to make it more clear and define it better. Another conclusion that I take further is that language matters. I'm going to be even more clear about that. I think that was you also who included that. And yeah, it needs continuous reflection, going back to your values and then how to take things further. Yeah, it requires continuous reflection and also reflection on our own positionalities. So thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. I learned a lot, and it's great to be able to do some self-reflection. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Inge. That was a very nice presentation, a very nice way of getting us started and thinking about the last couple of days. If I may highlight just 2 or 3 points that I think came out for me, just to mention to you, and then we can think about it all again when we have our discussion, I think you started out, I think, with a really important idea that is probably true, is that justice is implicit in almost everything we do. We have some sort of inner tug towards that, but that we can do much more to make it more explicit and in a variety of ways, through more participation, more community building, more interventions, and that so that we make this work very explicit. That's already part of what we do. I also think it's really important how you pointed out that justice, the notion has changed, possibly evolved over time. That capacity building was once considered just intervention, and now we know a bit better about what that actually means. And then indeed, contextualizing the meaning of justice, I think is really important, whether it be geographically, institutionally, whatever, that it does play a different role in different places. And I think there was much more that you said, but these were the things that jumped out for me, so I just wanted to bring that to the attention of everyone else. Thank you very much. Maybe join the table here, actually, yeah, and I thought Erica.
We can all sit on the sofa again, unless you.
Do you have
by myself, I'm not doing a presentation.
Do you have a presentation?
No.
No.
Then how do we, yeah, so if you please, the three of us.
Let's come back to the living room.
Then I'll join up as well. Great. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's no more presentations behind us.
I don't think I'm even gonna stay, can I just stay seated? That's
You may
like,
stay
we're
seated,
gonna go back
and
to sort of like
absolutely.
informal, cozy sofa
Absolutely, absolutely. So please, it's all yours.
Thank you. A hard act to follow. I didn't.
Actually, pause for a moment. Do you want the mic? Yeah, let's give you the microphone.
Oh, sorry. I do project. I don't know that the microphone is necessary. I have a pretty loud voice. So first of all, thank you for sharing those reflections, and I really appreciated the fact that you started with a comment about the origins of the institute that you work at, its history. I come from the Institute of Development Studies, which is in Brighton, in Sussex, and we have a very similar origin story. This isn't what I prepared to talk about it, but I'm just going to add that in now. It was formed in 1964 on the back of a wave of independence movements and sort of decolonizing processes. A lot of the first staff were former employees of the colonial governments. And we've been sort of going through a bit of soul searching in current times, because we have gone through a process of sort of cataloging and saving a lot of the materials from what has now become an archive. It was just basically a bunch of stuff in the basement, but it turns out that what gathers over since 1964 in the basement of a place like IDS is a lot of really valuable materials that have been sourced from all the places where people have worked, and now we're sort of turning that into something that can be open again for study, for consideration, for critical reflection. But anyway, that's not, I'm just by the by. What is my perspective? That I've been asked here to share my perspective. And before I get to what my perspective is, I want to just first extend a thank you. I am happy to be here. I want to thank Maggie for the invite. The invite actually went to the director, so I sort of feel like my mea culpa is like, I'm not the person you were really meant to get. It could have been a more illustrious sort of, presentation about, from a director's point of view about an institute. I just work at IDS, but I was really happy to be sort of gifted this opportunity, because to be able to come and share and hear how sort of debates are being talked about in a space that's not radically dissimilar, but a bit different from the space that I inhabit, or certainly the context in which I work, has been very edifying and a rare opportunity, I'd say, sort of coming out of COVID, to have this kind of a in-person gathering. And so the experience has really left me more than anything with a sense of gratitude. I mean, what a gift something like this is. I think, these opportunities for sharing learning, but for also an openness that I've witnessed people express towards being critically self-reflexive, generally critical, open about our doubts, our misgivings, our confusions. I think that creating a space where that is possible is an act of sort of in the direction of justice. I think you need that to do this work, to keep doing this work. But what can I offer in a few minutes that I have here that hasn't already been offered by others? I think it's a small offering. I think that everybody has shown up here and contributed in a way that has turned this into something that is more than the sum of its parts. And whether that is, as this colleague pointed out, adequately reflected in a video, no. But I was also just having a conversation about whether or not what else could be reflected of our connections, the way that each one of us individually is connected to whole other spaces of conversation, of debate, of dissent, of contestation. It's impossible to reflect that, but I also think that out of these events comes very unpredictable, there's an unpredictability to sort of what this produces, you know, in terms of connecting, in terms of new ideas, in terms of next steps. So I think that let's just like allow that to be a slightly unknown process, but acknowledge that in bringing people together and sending us all back out into the world, there will be effects that this workshop has produced. I'm a bit of an outsider to development studies. I don't consider myself a development studies person, but I work in Institute of Development Studies, and I've also been an outsider to this group of people here. So my perspectives are from that point of view. At the beginning, on day one, I was really struck by what Alfredo shared, but also what Melissa would have spoken about, which was the sense of crisis. The fact that we're in a moment of multiple overlapping, intersecting crises, maybe it's called polycrises. You know, we perceive ourselves to be in a period of crisis, or maybe coming out of it, maybe not. But you know, some of the things mentioned were climate and environment, food insecurity, pandemics, conflict, economic crisis, gender backlash. The sense of crisis is both galvanizing, and I think it can be paralyzing. It can have twin effects. And we see these challenges to equity and social justice everywhere all at once. And so we ask ourselves, I ask myself, what can be done? What role can I play? What's a meaningful contribution in this context, in this moment? What perspective do I have to offer you know, these times of crisis? And because, as was mentioned earlier, my first training is as a historian, and specifically Latin American history, and even more specifically the politics of public health in sort of the latter half of the 20th century, a period in Latin America defined by military dictatorship, and in many places a reclaiming or a contesting of collective memory and of history. So history itself was sort of a political act, not just, you know, sort of thing in the background, but there was a thing about, you know, well, if we don't know what has occurred, if we don't know the injustices that have occurred, how do we act on them? And this training that I had in history, though I've worn many, many hats since then, has had a profound effect on me, because it absolutely has reorganized my brain to a very different sense of scale and to a perspective on crisis. So in the second half of the 20th century, and I don't want to belabor the point, but so I'm going to talk about cycles, because I think we're in a cyclical moment that's quite important, and it's why holding a space for these kinds of self-reflections are so important. What we've witnessed over the 20th century and 21st century are multiple cycles of crisis. Well, repeated crisis. And if you look at the history of development, thought, and action, and global health, thought, and action, you can see a repeated pattern of a claiming of crisis that then justifies or enables certain types of interventions or actions. And it's kind of the default mode of development and of global health, to sort of talk about things in terms of being in crisis. But then when you look at it historically, you're like, well, I guess we're always in crisis then. I mean, the crisis is such a repeated pattern. It then causes me to look at this moment now and say, is this the right language we should be using? Is this helping us, or is this preventing us from doing the work that needs to be done? Is it enabling people to close spaces that we're starting to open? So one pattern that we've seen, and this is really specifically in health and in community development, but there's a generational arc that a pattern that you can trace. So in the 1930s, there was a really quite profound flowering of a new way of thinking that crossed disciplines, that crossed ways of understanding environmental impacts, health impacts, hygiene, sanitation, agriculture, development. And these were expressed in conferences and gatherings of people in both sort of colonial and post-colonial or non-colonial, so neo-imperial spaces in a Latin American context. But there were transnational networks that were sort of brought together and around ideas that at the moment were we would consider, even now looking back at them, quite progressive. That moment closed. There was an opening and then there was a closure. World War II happened, you had the formation of the UN, but some of these maybe more radical ideas kind of got put on the back burner in the context of a sense of crisis. We see this happen again in the 1970s, so this is a generational arc element that I think that is very powerful. In the mid-1970s, you can also sort of witness historically, again, like a real push in the direction of social medicine, social nutrition, multidisciplinary ways of working, systems approaches, feminist approaches, new redistributive justice, politics of redistributive economics. Sorry, that word is very difficult to say. And there was a flowering of these ways of thinking, but then with sort of economic crisis, well, with all the crises that then piled up, a fuel crisis, a food crisis, an economic crisis, political crises, there was a closure again. And this is the closure more people are familiar with now in terms of what happened in development sort of in the 80s and the 90s. COVID-19 has produced another type of a shock that is then, I'm witnessing, an opening once again to new perspectives, new ways of thinking, more inclusive politics of development, Black Lives Matter, decolonizing debates. Some of these older debates have come back again, but it refreshed in a new form with a new generation sort of speaking about them. And so my perspective on what has occurred here now today, and that I think we can gain from thinking about history, is that these moments of possibility can end up being quite small. They have the space to hold the possibility for the more radical forms of change. That is the act of the justice. It's holding the space for these alternatives to be expressed, to be articulated, to move between spaces, to be acted on, to be resourced. But we have to be aware that in the shock, in the aftermath of COVID, that already there's the backlash, already spaces are closing. So there's, so really what I think we have to be mindful of is our role in holding that door open as long as is possible. Very aware of the limits of our individual control or power in these processes. And I think this, like I said, this workshop for me was sort of a microcosm of this. I often feel myself that what I'm doing is just a pebble dropped into an ocean. But then we all know that when you can kind of bear witness to all the other pebbles that people are dropping, you can see the potential of the ripple effect of those acts that are actually very small. And it's okay if our work is small. We always talk so grandiose terms about innovation and upscaling, which nobody liked. And but there's such a development studies encourages a way of talking about the future that can be very grandiose, that can be lay claim to something that is much bigger than actually what can be quite profound and quite powerful, which can be very small. So it can just be a conversation, it can just be sort of showing up, it can be a holding of space. So where am I landing today? I think these are credos I try to remind myself and live by, that this field of practice, if you want to call it that, could have more humility, less expertise. We could be doing more listening, less diagnosing. We could have more self-doubt or hold more space for self-doubt. For some need less self-doubt, so let's be honest about it. And the power dynamics that exist in the spaces where we are, some people need their self-doubt addressed, and some people need take it back down a notch. More stillness and pauses, less running towards this future. Development is always running towards the future. But to pause and reflect, that's why to me this has felt like such a gift, because we don't get that opportunity often enough. And then finally, again, just gratitude for having the privilege to do this type of work, to engage with people in this way. And with that gratitude comes a sense of responsibility that, do I live up to it every day? No, of course I don't. But do I aspire to? Yes. So I think sort of keeping those, that sense of gratitude, but also the responsibility of the privilege of this way of working. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me, can we just summarize right before you stand? Yeah, or no, actually while you stand, that's fine. We'll do it simultaneously. Thank you, Erica, very, very much for that. And I just want to not restate anything you just said, but just highlight, I think one of the most profound things of well, actually you just said a lot of very profound things, I have to say, but what I like very much, I think that we would share from this experience is the way you phrase that it's it's a new opening for inclusiveness, or that we are experiencing moments of opening for inclusiveness, and the real act of justice is in keeping those spaces open. And I think that is the real struggle, and I think it's a very nice way of pinpointing it for us, that we just grab the door, we keep it open, we keep our foot in the door before it slams shut again, and before we lose the opportunity to get to the next stage of whatever that may be, and we have yet to define it, but I think that's a really wonderful way of conceptualizing that, and thank you, and also highlighting indeed that the profound and powerful can be in the small, and doesn't need to be these big, huge, grandiose acts or statements, but that we can contribute, we can all toss our pebbles into the ocean and see what happens. Thank you very, very much. I now hand the mic over to Ajay.
Thank you.
Oh, and can you tell me it's a 11:45? I don't have a clock.
So that Ajay doesn't keep talking. First, thanks a lot also for having me here. Thanks for Maggie. Just to be away from administration for 2.5 days is a huge gift in itself. I was very happy to be here and to have all these discussions. So my presentation, or my ideas that I present now, is a bit about all those meetings and talks, not just during these things, but also in having a coffee or talking to people of what I've learned through this whole process. Yeah, very interesting panel now. You put 3 anthropologists on the couch and 3 people who work on health sciences or public health and health inequalities. You put them together, so you will have a lot of overlap in that sense. You put, you put me next to Inge, who has mentored me for the last 20 years. So in that sense, some of our ideas will still match. So maybe I repeat something, but where I started off. So maybe let me position myself. So I work in the Faculty of Geosciences within a Department of Human Geography and Spatial Planning. So we are the kind of the social science voice within geosciences, right? I work within development studies unit with Annalise, with Dora and Bianca and others. We all come from very different backgrounds, but we all have this development studies, this critical perspective that we bring, not only in our section, but also within the department, but also within the faculty and outside as well. And it's important to keep that critical perspective. It's important to keep the focus back on the people. Yeah. And that's a bit about where I position. In comparison to ISS or to IDS, you all are, in a way, if I may use the word privilege, because you already start with that focus that it is development, it is this thing, and we have that space, right? Whereas for us, at some points, we also have to fight for that focus on people, fight for that focus on bringing the critical mindset, that there are not these linear processes of change, of very technological oriented change, that they forget people in the process. And Annalise has been fighting for that, many of us have been fighting for that within Utrecht, to make sure we bring back that focus on people, we bring back that focus on livelihoods, we bring back the focus on well-being. So justice for me, or my thinking around justice, comes a bit from my standpoint at this moment within Utrecht. I start off with first a kind of different views, and I was thinking this morning, we talk about justice and all these different definitions or terms, but justice is actually very messy, right? The practice of justice is messy. In a sense, I'm not saying messy in a sense that it's not achievable. It is messy in the process of it, right? Who is defining it and who is giving it? Is it a gift? Like Dora spoke about Mouse's term yesterday on gift. Is it a gift? Is it a right? Is it a process? Who is in charge of ensuring justice? And why is that person given the role of ensuring justice, right? So it's all about understanding our roles as instigators of the process, but also our roles of sometimes we are being involved in certain processes that we are not aware of, or may not be aware of, right? Be it here or be it in the field. So it's that messiness that we have to acknowledge, and that there is no linear process. That at every point we have to stand and question ourselves, is this still done in a just manner? Immaterial of who is involved and are constantly changing association and relationships with the field, with the people whom we work with, and among the people who study with us as well. It has to have a lot of room for dissent. To a large extent, I think within academics, at least in India where I come from, somehow dissent over a period of time, or dissent or debate, is going out of this academy. And I think that's where justice is lost. If you don't have your voice for dissent and for debate, like for example, the video that Anne showed yesterday, and she uttered, do these fisher women have the right to fight over with Adnan? It's not only about catching those crabs, it is about ensuring livelihoods, right? It's about, so there it's also about that debate. It's also about that dissent of creating those micro politics or micro dissents that's possible at the community level, but also here among our neighborhoods. It's this ability to debate, but also the ability to listen to debates. It's not just that, oh, I'm going to complain about everything or being critical. Am I able to listen to another voice that is there? Am I able to look beyond my own worldviews, my own specification? This is how it is being done always. Yeah, maybe that's the time to change that. This is not me talking as a manager, but it's also about, and I heard a lot in these discussions these last 2 days, is this critical voice. Yeah. And in some of these discussions, I found that, yes, critical voice towards constructive action. Yeah. Not critical voice to disable people from taking an action. Yeah. I sometimes feel within not just development studies, but in critical social sciences as well, that we go so far in criticizing everything that for some people we disable them from taking an action. Yeah. The idea of criticism or critical outlook, it should be that we provide that constructive space for action. If we don't take that constructive space for action, if we don't fail, then we don't learn. Yeah. And that's what we tell our students as well. Go and try out. It's okay to fail. It's okay to learn from the failures. Right? And I think that critical voices or critical analysis should have that constructive element also built into it. And then how can we go towards that constructive element? The second point I have, maybe links a bit further to that, is on positionalities. And I'm a big supporter of positionalities, and we had this very interesting discussion again yesterday in the videos. Who is the insider? Who's the outsider? Am I an insider? Am I an outsider? We have this as development studies scholars. We constantly deal with this, right? With every forum we are in, are we an insider, outsider? I may perceive myself to be an insider, but they may not see me as an insider. Or is my role changing? Am I going from this ethic to anemic perspective? Or is it really possible to get that anemic perspective? So this constant struggle for positionality was there in so many different discussions in the last 2 days. It's also to talk about, are we constantly, as you said, running towards this development? Are we also constantly running towards being an insider? It's sometimes also okay to step back and look at the processes. And that by stepping back or stepping just next to the process, we may have a very different view of how that process is going. And again, over there in terms of education, we teach our students, you have to be very much aware of your positionality, and there is this big level of insecurity as well, right? Like some of our students say, I'm a white, educated person going into the field, I don't know what will happen over there, why should I be doing this study and why not that? Maybe these questions you don't get anywhere at ISS because 98% of your students are from there. But we get these questions. we have students at Utrecht who are also from sustainability sciences. They ask, why should I fly to Kenya to do this study? Is it sustainable? Why can't I just stay here? And I say, you can't do development studies here. So these are the kind of discussion. The other discussions is, how can I go and do this study over there, whether I'm capable of doing it? Why should I be the person doing it? So we are constantly dealing with these questions, and sometimes when we reflect back on that, in this realm of positioning and landing students and their role and their markers and their positionalities or intersectional positions and all of that, sometimes we've gone maybe to an extent that we have forgotten that the process of learning, the genuine curiosity of learning about people's lives. Like some of us, we were discussing today with Maggie this morning actually, and I said, we should really push our students to go and learn, to have that genuine curiosity of who these people are, why they're doing that, what is it. And of course, we will constantly have that discussion about, oh, you are a white outsider, you are a white person, or you are an Indian person. Like, I go to Curacao, they're like, what is this Indian guy doing here in the study? But these markers, I can't leave it in the hotel and go somewhere without it. But it is about working with these issues. Right? And that's what we have to bring back into our development education, especially I speak for youth, maybe it's also relevant for Amsterdam, is that go back to that genuine interest in learning about people's lives. And also be aware that the people whom you are studying are also equally curious about you. And at least I hope they are, because of the number of people who come there. But that genuine curiosity should still stay, and that the joy of learning from those encounters should still be there, without of this constant fear about how am I going to produce knowledge. Am I going okay for time? Yeah. The third part I was coming back was also from the World Cafes, was on this idea of production of knowledge. And I was thinking, okay, so whose story is it? Who's telling the story? And why is there only one voice who's telling the story, right? So in a way that the production of knowledge has to go also through these justice questions as well. In terms of, am I the only person coming here bringing all that data and writing about it? Or am I writing this in conversation with people? As Inge said about co-creation. And for co-creation, am I setting the rules of co-creation, or are the rules set by the other person for co-creation? Yeah. I may think creating a video is a very nice way of presenting our data. They may think, no, I would rather have an article which I can show the municipality. This is a very important article to do this. So where do we have those discussions? Yeah. Where do we have those ideas of present, for example, in this transport project that we do with Bangladesh, we said, oh, let's make this nice video that you can show to the Dhaka Metro Corporation and all this thing. And they said, they will not watch this video. We need to have a session where we put our logos of Utrecht University and everything, and we make sure that this is there, and there's a newspaper report, and the newspaper report will be taken seriously. And I was thinking, it's not about what I say or they say, it's about the performance of this thing, which is important for them to bring attention to the issue. So the co-creation ideas over there, or the production of knowledge, or the presentation of the knowledge, has to be also looked at it from this justice perspective about what is relevant for the people with whom we are studying this concept. So in that way, it's that critical reflection of our approaches of dissemination, or our approaches to these processes, and to come back to this idea of that when we talk about justice or social justice, that it could come in multiple ways. It could be inclusion, it could be participation, it could be, as Inge said, also diversity, but it's also about care. Yeah, you said yesterday with the video about the women providing care. it's also about care from a human perspective, from an empathy perspective, right? Are we caring for the people whom we are involved with? You know? And that care element comes stronger within this justice as well. I will close now. My idea is for a just development approach that we move towards a more genuine curiosity and empathy to understand and reflect with the people we study, among the people whom we educate, and that we all move towards our shared understanding of just futures. That's my closing.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ajay. Thank you so much. These have been three really wonderful perspectives, I think, that tied things together in each in their own way. And just a couple of points to highlight from what you just said. So I think it's really nice that you started out by reminding us that justice is actually a very messy concept to engage with. The practice is messy, as you said, the meaning is messy, the actions we can take to ensure it are messy. It's not a linear, straightforward set of boxes to tick off, but it's a constant renegotiation with ourselves, with the people that we're interacting with our institutional setting, and we need to keep that in mind the whole time. So I think that's a really valuable point to bring out. And I think it's also very valuable that you highlighted for us that justice is also found in this sort of cross-section between genuine curiosity, wanting to engage with others, hoping that it's taking place on the right foundation, the production of knowledge that comes from those interactions, and then the presentation of knowledge. This is actually a three-way crossing that we need to pay attention to and put ourselves in the center of that and make sure that even if we don't get it exactly right, that we're trying to get it right and engaging effectively in that way. We have a few minutes left. We started a little bit late, so I'm going to take a little bit of liberty and maybe let us go a couple of minutes over time before we go to lunch. Are there any questions or thoughts from the audience? Yes, wonderful. I saw it in this order: Miki, Kvelis, and Phoebe. Yes, yeah, please.
Well, thanks to the rich reflections, I think what speaks from all of you is that justice, we shouldn't debate about it just in theory or conceptually or methodologically, but also how we can practice it as scholars and research institutes. And I was very inspired by Inge's concentric circles, where you go through the why, how, for what, who. And I think I appreciate so much this institutional comparison between us. And I think I'm gonna suggest to copy paste it for our group, well, to reflect on it together. I think that's an exercise that we need to be doing regularly. So thank you for that. It's more a comment.
Thank you. Kvelis.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. Very interesting. I have a question to all three of you, but I just need to introduce it very quickly. So it was triggered. The question is triggered by this this importance of language. Yes, language matters. Sure, the words we use matter, but they also don't matter. And we got a bit stuck on this word upscaling, but we know what we mean, right? We know what we mean. So what's important is what we mean. Is more important to me, at least. So we can call development transformative change. I don't really care. What's important, what we mean. We can the new name too. It doesn't say anything about what we really mean. Maybe a little bit more precise. But then it comes back to the other point of these cycles in history. And if we know what we mean, aren't we then often hearing things that we've heard already before? And that is a little bit, comes a little bit of frustration that I'm wondering what is new. So what have you heard now, considering also your own experience with what you know from the more classical texts or critiques, that is actually new in what we have been talking about?
Who would like to start? Yeah, please.
Yeah. I don't agree with you that it's something new, because I found a discussion on upscaling, on upscaling, and we were at this table, It was so clear, upscaling means we do something and we have to make it bigger, we have to go on a higher level. Why is that? And someone on our table said, it's actually, we trying to have it more creating a movement. You want to share expertise and what you learned and how you can continue learning and doing things, rather than upscaling in a vertical way and just say, okay, we have to upscale and become bigger. No, not necessarily. So I think there's a basic difference between those wordings. So we talk about horizontal sharing, not vertical, not a framework, but it's sharing the processes, sharing and becoming a movement. So what you suggest, Nick, is fair, because then also you have a kind of a movement from development studies. I don't know whether I forgot your name, but you want to add more because we discussed it quite a lot on our theory. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was, I think, very much about this idea of not trying to make something that is small and it works at the local level bigger, but trying to connect those experiences as small as they are and learning across those experiences, right? Which is a slightly different way of approaching the same objective. I think the goal is very much the same, right? It's learning from those experiences, but not necessarily trying to make them all encompassing and the new thing that we all should be doing. So I think it was a little bit more on that, our discussion at least in our table.
Can I just
No, please come back.
I just want to say, I agree with all of that.
Yep.
That's totally. And I think after some time at the table, we had the same discussion. Everybody had the same discussion. And we understand this. So we understand this about upscaling, maybe it's about whatever word you want to use, but we sort of very quickly we can agree rather than get stuck on the term. This is roughly what we mean. Can we move on and talk then, rather than saying again and again that the word upscaling was not the right word, right? And with that, can we actually go more to the meaning and see whether, so my question was much more about, aren't we just repeating debates or just using another word, repeating some of the critical debates about participatory development, now calling it co-creation. We've had these debates have been there. So my question was much more about that. What did you think?
So actually, you replayed the whole thing what you meant actually.
Yeah.
Did you? I had a
No,
thought.
please
Okay,
go.
no. Well, I was just going to reflect that that I think this question of language is such a double-edged sword, because sometimes what you can see if you're tracing actually the evolution of language around sort of different development concepts is that there's an aspirational act in sort of renaming something to sort of try to shift the practice of the thing. But then there can also be a co-optation of the term, and then very quickly the thing is the same thing, it's just now called something different. But the change that was desired by the name isn't producing the change. So it can sometimes provide a cover, I think. And I also think that sometimes people think, oh, well, we're calling it something different, so like obviously we're practicing in such a different way now, this development. But really, a lot of the really problematic aspects of the ways that this field has been shaped over time, and the ideas within it, and the exclusions, they're still there. They're still there. So I think so long as the languages will change, and I think finding new languages is part of that process of reimagining, recasting, re-energizing, but I think that it could be a mistake to think that simply the changing of the name creates a distance from a problematic past. That's how I've witnessed it, at least in my own work, is that sometimes people then sort of gather around a new language of development, and they do it so that they can distance themselves further from the past practices that they actually don't like and that are problematic. And then in doing so, you kind of create this, a sense, a perception that you have broken the thread, that there is no continuity from the past and the present, or it's a clean slate, we're doing a completely different type of development. And I think that is really dangerous. So I think it is important to sort of do the two things at the same time. I mean, they're completely in tension with one another, both sort of trying to produce something new while also holding that awareness of the continuities of colonial legacies in the work that we do in the here and now, rather than sort of saying, well, we're just, it's all done now, it's in the past. And there was a talk, actually it was yesterday, it was about, they were talking about sort of colonial debris, legacy shapes in Recife, in architecturally, from a very brief window of Dutch colonialism. It was like 25 years, but nonetheless you could see in sort of patterns of building and names, things that sort of were maintained up until the present moment in time. And I think in development we have to do that with art practices, so it's a little less obvious than building. Sometimes it is, I was working at over the last couple of years, I was working at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. An enduring debate at that institution is, should we change the name? Does the name need to be changed? And I actually think that, like, in keeping the name, it draws attention to the fact of what the origins, the very problematic origins of that institution have been. But rather than just saying, oh, it's problematic and but we're something different now, it's like actually keeping the name, it like keeps that critical edge, that critical awareness of what are the, what still is maintained, what has genuinely changed. So that's sort of more of a philosophical reflection of that language, but yeah, I had to come in on that. You had to say too.
I had to think, how do I use it and how? I think language in these contexts is also a currency. Because when you're working in an interdisciplinary environment, like for example, when I have to work with public health researchers or I may be using terminologies that has been used in development studies for a long period of time, or anthropologists know that. But for this group, it is new. For the change that we want to bring with this group, it is new. So in that way, you use it as a currency to go further on, to talk with them about participatory methodologies. When I talk to you all about participatory, I'm not telling you all anything new. But if I talk about participatory methodologies to a group of public health researchers, for them it is new. They want to hear new voices. Right? So in that way, you have to also think, okay, this is a concept, this is a thing, but who is the audience or the group on whom this is being applied, and why would that be relevant to that person? In that context, in that, maybe it's very micro in that sense, but you still bring about change in a kind of a perspective for that group.
I want to get to Phoebe's question, but I just want to first, I see two more hands. Is this responding to the conversation we're having right now, or are these new questions? Can it be very brief? Because then I want to make sure that we have time for Phoebe's question as well. Yeah?
I can go after mine.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on it because I really like what Daria said before about the cycles and the opening and the closing, and relating that to the question of what is new. Maybe the idea of needing something new should also be critically reflected upon, because in a sense development and progress and all means that, oh, we're going to change the world, but I always see that there are forces acting that are making things more unjust, and therefore we constantly need to work towards making things more just. And maybe in the balance there might be some dynamics that are happening, but we're never going to eradicate injustice or inequality. But if we let go of working towards that, then the forces of injustice are going to take over. And so maybe just keeping those windows of opportunity, or you said those opening spaces, it's really important to hold on to those and to recreate them and to constantly reflect and always make ourselves aware, and keeping that process, so more seeing it as a process and keeping the process alive. Maybe that is all we can sort of aim for, rather than thinking, oh, it has to be something new. No, maybe we just need to always remind us of what's important.
Thank you. I'm going to go to, yeah? Okay. Phoebe, please tell us your
I don't know how to put it, but I want to say it squarely. I want to thank the question, development for whom? Because when I get into the room with enormously developed people talking about development, it's a question like, why are you talking about development when you already have it? So thank you for that question, because that's the appropriate question that I need you to address. And when you speak of justice, we problematize the word justice, but before Claros gets defensive of upscaling. The issue of justice should be something on the question of what is emancipatory for us, what is needed to be emancipated, because we come from the world which is uneven, and there is uneven development. But we don't say we don't like uneven development. As development scientists, we want to make, the world a better place by at least leveling the playing field. So we speak of emancipation in the context of leveling the playing field. So before I end, I'd like to broach the idea, maybe Maggie or Inge can do a tri-university with the University of the Philippines. You teach development in our place, and I want to share to you our development perspective. So maybe 3 months interface in the bush houses in the island where I come from, and you can speak of how do you think of the development that these people want? Because we have a lot of theories, Tudaro. How about Farida Latas? How about Bandana Porcayasta? How about Sujata Patel? Boaventura dos Sousa Santos, Mignolo, Quijano, Maria Lugones? I am expecting you critique them from your perspective. And I also expect them to have a critique on guys like Kay Eugen, Joseph Nye, Kastenstein, or Stiglitz. So there will be an exchange. And it's going to be international, as in really international, but well, maybe this is just a starting point.
Thank you very much. Indeed, if I can add to that, I think that is the way that we need to go. I think that is absolutely a direction that needs to be made structural as part of an education in development to take that direction. Can we squeeze in one more question, and then I think is there a question that you have?
Question/comment?
Okay, yeah.
Is there time for the panel to reflect? Can we still bring a question?
Let's make this the last one, but let's try and keep it brief.
It's actually building quite a lot on what has been said. So just my thinking went really into resonating with the expression of gratefulness that I think Erica brought. Actually, all three of the panelists, really this the time to pause, and that we're creating here as an act of just idea, or the creation, evolvement of just ID, and how we can see this as an ongoing process also within this community, and how these principles of solidarity, of co-creation, actually, what does that mean for us as colleagues, students, educators, researchers in this field coming together in this form, and how do we envision that as a process moving forward, also in broader academia, which in this forum has also come up as a space that is also quite restraining. There's restraining forces. So whereas potentially a pioneering field in its essence, which is what I guess development studies brings in its essence, how can we kind of continue to hold these spaces, which I think was also brought forward, to come together out of this, kind of from these principles of together learning, together opening up living questions of just ID. So maybe more a reflection than a question, and hopefully, an invitation, as Nikki also said, to keep exploring how we can stay related, connected, collaborative, rather than competitive in this field.
Let's maybe everyone gets 1 minute to respond. Is that possible? But I'm going to start though. I'm going to take advantage of my moment and say I think actually the suggestions that you were just bringing up speak exactly to the points that you were raising. And this is something we can follow up with immediately. But now I will pass it on. I won't even use a whole minute. There you go.
1 minute, Erica.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, just I keep trying. I really don't have reflection other than that the unanswerableness of what it is that we do, the conflicts it should necessarily generate, the dissent that it necessarily generates, we hold space for that. We hold space for the discomfort, but we keep trying. And I don't really know what more one can offer.
1 minute, I would say thanks very much. And what is the action? Because I think to have these spaces and to learn from each other, to have the different groups together is a really great idea. I think we should do that because we learn from each other so much. So I would immediately ask action. I volunteer from ISS to be involved. Who from Utrecht? Who from Amsterdam? Who else is here from? Yeah. So then great action.
Yeah, and I want to say there were of course other colleagues who were invited. No? Bram cannot make it today.
Wageningen.
Tina, Radbouw, the
Yeah.
Army program. I tried, but sometimes we were also busy. So I really hope the next time we do it, we really can get more colleagues together. Even though we think we are a community, we actually don't know so much what we are doing. Not even in our own department.
Yeah.
So it is, regularly we can do this and see how to move forward.
Yeah.
In a
Let's do
format.
that.
Yeah.
Yes, other than the fact that we talk always about the research and these things, community is also about supporting each other, right? So we live and work within work environments that are not always right. So I think it's also what I've learned is through these friendships and relations that we build across institutions that we learn to support each other as well, of creating these just working spaces. And as we champion for justice in the field, we need to champion for justice also here in our work environment. And I think that those friendships, those relationships that we build across these institutions, it's important to bring that in as well.
Thank you. I think that was actually a great way to close off. Keep the spaces open, allow for discomfort in those spaces, and create just working spaces that we have that open for each other. I think that's really wonderful